there is an end to the story. But the lives of the people involved go on, as you're suggesting. And that is fascinating to me with memoir.
This is Daring to Tell, the podcast where writers read their own true stories of personal daring, and then we talk about it. I am your host, Michelle Rado.
Nothing's gonna make me brave. Nothing's gonna make me brave. Nothing's gonna make me brave except doing what makes me scared.
Today's episode is a Daring to Tell bonus. After I read Gretchen Charrington's memoir, The Butcher, the Embezzler, and the Fall Guy, a family memoir of scandal and greed in the meat industry, I was in a bit of a quandary. This is a book that is not only a memoir, a generation's deep memoir, but also a mystery, an open inquiry into what she might be able to discover about the character of her grandfather, A.L. Eberhardt. He was a high-up executive, a salesman, who helped grow butcher George Hormel's family business into an innovative and successful meatpacking company. Grow it did for a couple of decades in the early 1900s until it was discovered that their head financial guy, Cy Thompson, had been embezzling from the company for about a decade. Before the discovery of the embezzlement, life was good. During the uncovering, everything became murky and under question, including A.L. Eberhardt's loyalty, integrity, and even potential involvement. How far had the rot spread? Had he been involved? Had he known? Then George Hormel required Eberhardt's resignation. Eberhardt conceded. This was the seminal event that set off shockwaves through a family for generations. The after of this event has not been forgotten. If you have not read this book yet, and you are at all inclined, this is the point where I would suggest you pause your listening and check out the first conversation I had with Gretchen from June of this year. That conversation came out the day that her book was released into the world. I wanted no spoilers in that conversation. At the end, I invited her back for the after folks had read the book conversation, so we could fully discuss the many revelations she found in the decades of her search for answers about her grandfather, about this legendary resignation/firing, and how it's grown to have a narrative of its own in her family. Can someone so deep in a family and in a family history step back enough and open her mind to question what has been taken for granted and lived as true with a genuine fresh investigation, with objectivity? Her book is about that very quest, and this is the discussion where we look at befores and afters of the three title characters: the butcher, George Hormel, the embezzler, Cy Thompson, and the fall guy, Gretchen's grandfather, A.L. Eberhardt. I was thinking about this sort of before and after idea because that was our before conversation. This is our after conversation. So we're going to talk about understanding the full swath of the book and what you've been through, because that is that's the interesting part to me. And so I can certainly share some of my thoughts about what I read going through it, but I'm also just so curious to hear some of your thoughts for after going through all of this and writing it.
Yes, and so especially after having just been in Austin, Minnesota for the fourth time in my life.
Yes.
So.
That one, let's hold on that because I am very curious to hear about that. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of that before and after my own observation. When we talked the first time, I gave an assessment of these three characters and my thoughts of them. And I had sort of thought George Hormel was an interesting person and an innovator,
Very.
and in a
Yes.
weird way, in spite of, your grandfather's experience
Right.
getting fired. I thought of him as a good guy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There was Cy Thompson, who was clearly the bad guy, although was it your grandfather or your dad who had sort of this a little twisted appreciation for him or something? That's not the
Yes, that
right.
was more my dad. Yes,
Okay.
in terms of the Embezzler. Yes, I think
Right,
his
right.
maybe not twisted so much as differing views of him. He was
Right.
not purely bad as I heard it.
Right.
He was also incredibly inventive and imaginative. And oh my goodness, how he could get away with this big embezzlement right under the eyes of the executives. So there was some almost appreciation,
Yeah. The
weird respect
appreciation
in a
for
sense,
what exactly. Weird
Um,
respect for how he did what he
yeah,
did.
yeah.
After all that, I more marvel a little at his character,
Mhm.
which is, I think, the most one-dimensional almost
Yeah.
of all of them. But of course, we have some surprising twists with him in the end, too,
Mhm.
with
Yes.
not only the embezzlement, but these other morals charges that he went to
Mhm.
jail for a
Yep.
second
Yep.
time. So that was really like, oh. And then there's your grandfather, who I guess it feels like through your exploration through this whole book, you kind of do a 360-degree turn. Like you're ready to say, is he really innocent? And by the end, you were like, he was wronged, and when I read about the technicality of if you resign, you have to turn back your stock,
Yes.
which was one of the real just twist of the knife ironies of the whole situation, that even the stock that was not worth anything anymore, he was forced to turn back.
Correct.
And so the lowest moment of your grandfather having to start over, I mean, after 6 months of trying to figure out how can we fix this,
Right.
after the embezzlement comes out, there's this big trip to Chicago. The bankers agree to help him try and transition this period because it was too big to fail. I mean, it was just such a captivating look at a company from the inside when something terrible happens and the decision that does get made to like save it. I mean, we know those stories in our own time, but to see it in a different time and in a different way and a little more closely from not only the business but the personal side, that was interesting too. So that was really hard to feel everything that your grandfather went through because with his wife dying simultaneously was just absolutely heart-wrenching, and he did turn things around eventually, but so I guess, I don't know, I'm gonna let you talk at some point. But that also was another sharp before and after. I felt the change in your grandfather's life. Of he was fired, his wife died, he sent his youngest daughter to live with an aunt, right? Is that
best friend? Well, actually, best friends of theirs, but yes,
right.
Yeah.
And your dad and your uncle being old enough to kind of know what's going on. The whole question of not telling someone when they have cancer.
Yes.
Huge thing. So through all of this, there's these before and after moments. And there's also the before and after of you writing this book.
Correct.
So one of the things that I felt was the revelation that you seemed to come to through the course of the book was the surprise at how close these three characters were through the largest swath of their time working together and into the embezzlement.
Yes.
So what were your feelings about that as you were discovering, I guess that my grandfather and Cy Thompson were friends.
Yeah, and that's a good place for me to start, probably, because and I won't go into too much about what happened in Austin till later, perhaps, but having just come from there and having spent an entire day touring Austin and the environment around it, sort of the swath of great land around it, it was even more clear to me how close knit this community was back then, when it was only 4,000 or 5,000 people in this small city. And George Hormel, my grandfather, and Cy Thompson were all three well-regarded, popular figures. People had thoughts about George Hormel sometimes as a boss. He was tough. All of that is true. And yet there was respect for him as the owner of the company and as someone who had done well by the community in the sense of providing jobs, et cetera. But really, when you look at where they lived, they were each, Cy Thompson's house and my grandfather's house, probably a half a mile apart.
Wow.
That's not very far,
right,
when there aren't very many buildings around, and even when there are. And George Hormel lived across the river, so he lived a little bit further away. But if you walked, it was probably, I'm guessing, 2 miles at the most. And certainly they drove, all the time back then.
right.
So the proximity physically was really clear. And one of the things that was sort of tough for me to imagine when I was there the first 3 times, and still again last week, is just the space without any buildings in them. It's all sort of grown up now. There are 22,000 people or something like
Right.
that in Austin now. So if you think about the fact that they were working in a still relatively small company, there were 1,000 employees. Some have said 1,500 even. So not tiny, but in a company where one would know most of the people, certainly in your echelon, and they were all in the administrative ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think about the fact that Cy Thompson and the Eberhards attended the same church together on Sundays. And then you think about the proximity just geographically of these 3 men. It's impossible to think that they weren't friends.
Right.
And then in addition to that, if you think about the fact agriculture is so important there and everyone raises something. George Hormel wasn't so much raising his pork as buying it from others, but still he cared about the animals, he cared about the prizes they won, he cared about what was going on, in the agricultural world. And then you have Cy Thompson and my grandfather, both of who had farms that were raising animals and trying to win awards for them in state fairs. It really is hard to imagine that they weren't friends of some sort. Then we add in what I was told by, and this is in the book, what I was told by a gentleman out in Leroy, Minnesota, which is about 30 or 40 miles south of Austin, and it's where the amusement park was built, that Jay Hormel, George Hormel's son, was also a very good friend of Cy Thompson's. They were closer in age, probably. And the Hormel company, at the big events that took place out at this amusement park, the tables were full of Hormel meats to be sold or to be consumed. So this is a kind of, I won't say incestuous, because I don't think that term applies at all, but it was a sort of typical small town where people knew each other, and it would have been close-knit, yes, close-knit, and very homogeneous, almost everybody employed by the Hormel company.
Yeah.
Still nearly true today, not quite as true, but still pretty true. It's certainly the major employer. So I think that was the most revealing to me when I really came to terms with the fact that they had to have been close on some level.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of surprising to me because I didn't really hear that kind of thing from my dad. It felt as if the 3 men were more separate than that.
They were like these separate pillars of characters. And so to realize.
Well said. So I wasn't impressed as a kid or growing up with their proximity as friends. I knew George Hormel and Lillian Hormel, and my grandparents were friends because they camped nearby each other in the summers, and Lillian and Lena were friends and did lots of things in the community together. So Yeah, and yet why wouldn't they be?
Right.
Precisely.
Yeah, and one of the things that even struck me was how Lillian and Lena remained close after the
Yes,
firing. That had to be weird somehow.
I know. I wish that I had more information about that, because Lillian did continue to show up at the Eberhardt home to read to Lena, to do her darning and mending,
Mhm.
that Lena
Yeah,
could no
yeah.
longer do. It's a
Yeah.
sweet anecdote, in a sense, in this story, that I don't know whether they ever talked about anything that was going on between their husbands or not.
Right. And they were both on the board of directors even.
They had been earlier, right?
Can I ask about that actually? Do you think that that was more um proxy isn't the right word, like they were there as figureheads, like expected to just represent their husband's perspectives, or do you feel like it was a genuine seat?
It's a good question. I don't know that I can give a solid answer to it, but
Right.
my feeling is that it was more than that.
Yeah.
My feeling is that when these several other gentlemen who had been part of the board split off because their company split off of Hormel, that George needed to fill those seats. And I do think that that was probably the peak of time when both Lena and Lillian were greatly admired in the community for what they had been doing. They were both smart. They were both involved in the company in their own way. Lillian had done all the books and written all the payroll from the very early days. And Lena had been privy, I think, to my grandfather's thoughts about sales and what was going on in his arena, not to mention cooking hormone meats at the company picnics, etc., the more
Yeah.
traditional female role. But I think, and from a couple of people with whom I've spoken out in Austin, they've sort of validated that to me, that they think too that George would have put them on his board because he believed they were good, smart, capable people, which
Yeah.
is very progressive of him back
Right.
in 1914 or whatever. I think maybe it was 1910
Mhm.
when they went on.
Right.
So kind of surprising to have another non-family member on the board and also women.
Yeah.
Very unusual. Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
also, I think it was his sister also he put on the board. So there were three women who came on the board at the same time.
Yeah, I was impressed by that, and I think that I got the sense from how you described it that it was not just like placeholders, that they
Right.
felt like
Right.
genuine participants in the process. Well, as I was thinking about this close-knit aspect that did also surprise you, I don't know if I did surprise you. It felt like it
I
surprised
did.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminded me of another quote I had read in another book that I'm partially through at the moment, called The Fox and I by Catherine Raven.
Hmm.
I don't know if
I've
you know it,
heard of
but
it, but
it's
I haven't read it.
in the context of nature, which I
Hmm.
also like the comparison because you were talking about just the physicality of being there.
Right.
So the quote is actually from John Muir
Okay. Yeah.
of Muir Woods fame.
Yes.
Won't
Yes.
characterize him any other way. That's how I was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of Muir Woods."
Right.
When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched up to everything else in the universe.
Great quote. That's a wonderful quote.
I love that.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that in terms of this opposite end of the universe spectrum, but bugs. Because
Yeah.
also in nature, what happens if we try and get rid of these pests?
Right.
So,
Right.
everything is tied
Something
in
else.
together. But here, this was, everybody was tied up together in this thing.
Yes. And I think that's why it has resonated for 100 years. And I think it's why, in my words anyway, it was, I think, traumatic for
Mm,
both the company and certainly for my grandfather, and then sort of passed down to my father and on to me.
yeah.
I think that when you think about that quote from John Muir, and then you think about a constellation of people in Austin, every single person is affected by both the embezzlement itself,
Yeah.
the discovery of it, and then the near collapse of the Hormel company,
Yeah.
and finally my grandfather's firing also.
Yeah.
And Thompson's going off to jail. I mean, all of those very big events, I think, touched thousands of people in southern Minnesota.
Yeah.
You know, one thing to remember, too, is that in Cy Thompson, he had 3 farms, actually. I saw 2 of them while we were out there, and I'd seen the other one before, that there were probably hundreds of people working for him at those 3 farms.
Right. Right.
So it's not just the Hormel employees who suffered, but the employees who worked for him who likely suffered as well.
Yeah. So that leads to a question that I had, because I know as you puzzled through the reasons why George Hormel might have made the decision to fire your grandfather, to
Right.
ask for his resignation, technically fire him. These other farms and competing interests was
Right.
one of them. And that didn't especially ring true to me. I don't know, because it did seem just perhaps natural at the time that many people did have farms and that they would be doing something independently, but was it indeed seen as competition?
Right. Yeah, so I think it's interesting, your response to that, because I think it's like many readers' response to it, which has been, what's the big deal? Everybody was
A
raising
little bit,
hogs or,
yeah. Yeah.
something, chickens, something. So I come to this also, though, with the sort of executive management head that I have.
Right.
And I do think, and it appears to be true from George Hormel's autobiography, even Cy Thompson's autobiography, I think he includes this too, that Thompson was asked by George Hormel on several occasions, and who knows how many, but at least on 2 or 3 occasions, how he could possibly be the comptroller of the company and also run these farms.
Right.
Wasn't he feeling too split? Shouldn't he let go of his job so that he could focus on what looked like very successful farms? And of course,
no, I can't do that.
Very quickly said sort of that thing. No, they're all run by my cousins. I don't have anything to do with them. In fact, he was on their board, etc. And it's possible that he also said that to my grandfather, although I have no record of him having said that to my grandfather.
Right.
But he could have. And I think a lot of things in life don't seem clear at all until later on, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, George Hormel obviously accepted the descriptions by Cy that he had somebody else running the farms and he wasn't really that involved. And he may well have accepted any kinds of accolades my grandfather got for all the prizes he awarded for his steers and stuff. But after the embezzlement, I think if you are the CEO of a company and you learn that your executive vice president has been working hard aside from the Hormel company, I can see how that would begin to become a bigger question,
right,
for George Hormel.
Yes, in the aftermath of the embezzlement. That I agree. That does make more sense. One of the other ones, I have my little list here of questions that did make a lot more sense to me, and I had more questions about myself, was this friendship with George Swift.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Absolutely.
How did he not have a bigger problem with this? Did he say, what are you talking about with Swift? How you remain friends with this guy? He's the leading competition. And even aftermath, why would Swift not snap your grandfather up and say, you're working for us now? Like that, to me, I don't know any of those.
That's an interesting question. Actually, I hadn't ever thought of that. Now I'm forgetting exactly when Gustavus Swift died. So George Swift, at the time of this embezzlement period, from say 1919 to 2020. I mean 1920. Sorry,
I know.
1922 or 23, was not working at the company, as far as I know. He was living in Boston. He had inherited. If his father had already died, he'd probably inherited a lot of money. If his father hadn't died by then, which I just can't remember at the top of my head,
right,
he already was a very wealthy man, clearly. but it's a little unclear to me exactly how involved in the Swift and Company he still was.
I
I
see.
believe that my grandfather first met him as eligible bachelors in Chicago when they
Mm,
were 20, and that they pulled up a friendship between them for whatever reasons. And then when the economy turned south, so about 1898, 99,
mm-hmm.
my grandfather's job, that he had started a gentleman's clothing store in Chicago, and he was having a harder time selling clothes because the economy was so bad. And he was
Mm-hmm.
pretty desperate for a job. He was married and needed money. And the story goes that he bounded into Gustavus Swift's office and basically said, "I need to work, and I love sales, and can you put me to?" And Gustavus Swift was so impressed with his sort of chutzpah to do
Mm-hmm.
such a thing that he hired him on the spot and then elevated him quickly through the coming year.
Right.
So all that to say that he and George Swift, I think, were personal friends primarily, not so much
Right.
through the company. Now, whether he
Interesting.
went to
Okay.
Swift and Company because George suggested it, or just he thought, well, I know George Swift, maybe I can go see
Right.
if I can get a job from his dad. I don't really know.
Right.
But I do think also that that relationship must have been tough for George Hormel, particularly after the embezzlement was discovered.
Yeah.
And as you know from reading the whole book, that George Swift was my grandfather's most loyal friend through life
Yeah.
and really helped not bail him out entirely, but helped guarantee his loans to the banks.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, if I were CEO of the company and my executive vice president was such close friends with the heir of a competitor and was making proposals with him about sort of separating Hormel from Eberhard, I think that must have stuck in his craw if nothing else.
I know. I
um,
was gonna
yeah,
say, would you in that situation least have a conversation about it and something would be on the record about it and all those kind of things? Now, maybe that's more prominent now.
right,
I don't know.
probably so.
Yeah.
And I certainly have found nothing in the documents I have from my grandfather of such a conversation.
Right.
And certainly George Hormel didn't mention it in his autobiography. But just knowing CEOs and being inside companies myself, I do think that that was problematic probably in the end for my grandfather.
Yeah.
It's one of those situations, Michelle, where you do whatever you have to do to save your family.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he had to do, in a way, what he did. I don't know if I would have done it differently if I'd been in his shoes, but
Mm-hmm.
I think he was doing everything he could to save his family and his finances. And yet, in hindsight, that might have been a strike against him rather than for him,
Yeah.
relationally, at least with George Hormel.
Right.
But on the other hand, it allowed him to sort of get a little bit back on his feet. So,
Right.
how do we make these really hard
It
choices,
is. It's
that
yeah.
are sort of gray, and there's a lot of nuance in them?
Very gray and I don't know, claustrophobic is the word that's popping into my mind. Like you're just so
Yes,
close up against
yes, so
everything.
close. You can't really see.
Right.
And as I say in the book, I mean, my grandfather really leaned into his relationships in this terrible time. I mean, he had amazingly loyal friends, and his relational skills, his emotional intelligence, if you will,
Yeah.
on some levels, as we see it today, was extremely high. And yet, some of those relationships also were held with the company
Right. Right.
on some level.
Well, it
Yeah,
just really points back to that interwoven nature of everything and
totally.
everyone
Yes. Yeah.
and in a time. Understanding a place and a time is
Yes.
another thing that I have really been gaining more appreciation for as I do concurrent reading with
Yes.
other things that took place in that era.
Correct.
Because I've been reading, I was telling someone else about this recently. I can't even remember where, but and I don't remember the name of the book, which is terrible. But
Like
there's a
me.
book of letters. Yeah. I'll go find it. It's
Yeah.
downstairs. There's a book of letters that are back and forth between I think his name is John Love. It's funny because she always calls him Mr. Love, but John Love and Ethel Waxham, who becomes Mrs. Love, and it is a courtship. She is a school teacher. This happens in the early 1900s.
Okay.
She went to school in Massachusetts at Wellesley.
Mm-hmm.
I think at Wellesley, and had a group of friends there. They all were school teachers. They all were going off to do other things. She got this school teacher job in Wyoming. She became just completely enamored with the family that she lived with. And there was a rancher there, John G. Love, and he just became totally smitten with her. They'd go on sleigh rides, all of this. Anyways, so to read their letters back and forth and what they were doing. Okay, so the first thing that surprised me about this time, which sort of ties back to the question about your grandmother and Lillian Hormel being on the board, was their very active interest in politics and what was going on at the time. Really involved. And my own knowledge of this time is embarrassing, so I can't really say too much about it, but they loved William Jennings Bryan, I think. They were just like, we're really in favor of Mr. Bryan, and we hope that and they could vote. Women could vote on, I guess, the state and local levels, but it was only the national level, because they said because they would talk about voting, and I was like, wait a minute, but this was 1910. I could be getting some of this wrong, but anyways, in one respect, they're just exactly people with all of our same fallibilities and characteristics that we have now. And the times and the conditions and the things that they're dealing with are slightly different, changed by technology. But I think that the day-to-day living and navigating through it all is so much the same. So there's something that, again, makes it feel very much more familiar to us rather than distant.
Unfamiliar. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point that you're making, that I can't remember who said it, that the only subjects in literature are love and death or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's some truth in it. Was that Shakespeare or something? Anyway, I should know. But really, day to day, there were the affairs of the family and the affairs of the job, and commuting back and forth between them, and the various neighbors and friends that people had. And so, I mean, I do think that on a basic level, things were very much like they are now. I do think that there are, in the case of my book anyway, there are some things that are a little bit different, but this kind of gets to your point about technology in a sense, that, for instance, between my grandfather and a lot of the animal brokers that he was involved with. So these are people who are not employed by the Hormel Company. They have their own ranches where they're raising meats, or they might be raising cotton, or they might be raising wheat, depending on the part of the country, etc. These guys were all sort of friends within this big conglomeration of companies that supported each other through the kinds of products that they bought and sold. And within that community of men, I think pretty much only probably at that time, was what appears in my grandfather's letters to be a sort of informal borrowing and lending system outside of the banks, where, some guy in Texas is a little short on a loan, but his crop is coming in the next week. And my grandfather sends him a few $100s or a number, and then gets paid back in a week, let's say, or a month. So that kind of lending system was that was a surprise to me. I did not know that sort of thing took place. I've certainly seen it, in families and, other places, but I didn't know that kind of professionals were lending money to each other. And so on a certain level, my grandfather, when his finances collapsed, the fact that he reached out to these broker friends of his, they weren't all brokers, but some of them were, wasn't particularly unusual, because they had been doing that all along. I just think the numbers had probably been smaller. So whereas he needed $25,000 to get through the next quarter, and then $75,000 to get through the next quarter, back then, dollar value back then, considerably more now, he really needed financial help. And so he reached out to these folks, and they supplied him, as I suspect he had in the past to them in smaller amounts.
Mm-hmm.
So this also would have been a tough thing, I think, for Mr. Hormel to accept, because these brokers were doing business, yes, with A.L. Eberhardt, but it was A.L. Eberhardt on behalf of the Hormel Company.
Right.
And so, again, was my grandfather misguided in doing that? Yes, from a sort of black and white point of view.
Right.
Was he trying to save his wife from dying from cancer?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was no medical insurance. There was no Medicare, Social Security. There were no public supports for someone dying of cancer. And it was incredibly expensive to give her the best care that he could, which was his primary goal. So anyway, I do think the times, that may exist in certain communities still today. Those kinds of informal lending systems do exist today.
Yeah.
But probably, I would think not at sort of major corporations or in that kind of situation.
Right.
That would not be allowed at all.
Right, right. And so what about these 2 banknotes that you find in a box at the very end? That is like the what?
Yes, right. So just to remind people, or for readers who haven't read it yet, that I thought I had sort of put the story to bed after my third trip to Austin. And then I remembered back in New Hampshire, where I used to live, say 6 months later, that, oh my gosh, there's still one more book in my father's archives at the Dartmouth College Library.
Book or box?
Box, excuse me. One more box out of the 4 that I haven't actually gone through. And so I called the library and said, I'm going to come up and spend a few days looking at this last box. And when I started flipping through the papers within the box, it was all kinds of things that I'd already seen before, letters back and forth with friends of his in the industry, some letters to his wife, his children, those kinds of things. I assume that those are copies of things or those are the letters that Lena would have saved, for instance, and my father would have saved, and that's how they got into the archives. But in any case, I'm flipping through these pages, and then all of a sudden there's an 8x11 sheet. It's a sort of a 3-sentence letter to my grandfather from one of his bankers, simply reporting that his loan, for one was about $1,200, has been paid with interest. So we're clearing out the loan, payment received by Ransom J. Thompson. I was just gobsmacked. I was stunned.
Yeah.
It was the thing I hoped I wouldn't find for many years. And yet there it was in black and white from the president of the bank. And I don't know. I sat back against the chair, and I just was like, what do I do with this? How do I deal with this? What do I think of this? Is it okay? Is it wrong? Just all those questions flooding your brain kind of. Well, of course, I immediately knew that it wasn't good. That was clear for my grandfather. So then, I flipped through more and I came across one more sort of in the same amount. I think this one was more like $2,100. These were significant sums back then.
Right.
So it would not, it would have been many times that today.
Right.
So they were fairly large numbers, really. And with the 2 of them, I couldn't pretend it was only once, there was now, there were now 2.
Yeah.
There were no more. There were no others than that. And this raised so many questions for me, Michelle. I can't even tell you how many questions it raised.
Yeah.
From a very almost superficial level. Why did my father leave them in the box, in his archives?
Yeah.
Did that mean that my father had never read any of these documents? My father was now gone, so I couldn't ask him directly. Had he simply swept up these boxes out of his grandfather's belongings at some point in his life, held on to them, and then when his literary archives were provided to Dartmouth, had he simply thought, well, they'll be safe there, I'll give these boxes too.
Yeah.
I don't know my father well enough really to be completely certain whether he read them or not. I could argue it
Right.
either way and
Yeah.
feel confident that he either had and then chose not to tell anybody,
Yeah.
or hadn't, and I was the first one in the family to read them. I think either really could have been true. So just on that level, what my father knew,
Right.
what he didn't know, was a whole jumble of questions for me.
Yep.
But then there's a whole question, and this is where my cousins play out with me in these
I was curious
conversations,
about them. Yes.
which is that what do those two documents actually tell us? Well, clearly, the loans were paid off by Cy Thompson. There's no arguing that fact.
Yes.
Did my grandfather ask him to do that? Did he do it in order to kind of be nice to my grandfather so my grandfather would be nice to him? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's still,
Consciously or
did he
unconsciously.
consciously or unconsciously, or what was Cy Thompson's motivation for paying them? Again, I don't know if my grandfather
Yeah.
asked for help
Right.
or not.
And this was before. So it wasn't, it
This
was
was
not the same. It was not even that he was experiencing the dire urgency that he had afterwards. So this was just
correct.
while he
This,
had his wealth too, which is
yes,
also
exactly.
interesting. Yeah.
Which is also interesting because why would he have had to have help
Right. Right.
paying those loans off? Now, I do know
Yeah.
that he was in pretty good debt. I mean, and yet he had plenty of
Right.
assets to cover all of his debts.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it's a very challenging question to really answer. I think
Right.
that my cousins probably feel mostly that our grandfather did not ask for those payments to be made. I really just can't say. I really don't know.
Can I ask, so if he hadn't asked, how would
Yes,
Cy Thompson even know? I mean, would that be common knowledge, like that they both
right.
are banking with the same banks in town or whatever?
Well,
Like,
it
how would they
shouldn't.
know?
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be from the banker's point of view. Obviously, the banker, shouldn't
Right.
have been informing
Yeah.
him or anything.
Right. Right.
But could Cy have known because he's in the executive offices and he has a bead on every penny that's going in and out of the company, and he
Mm,
has some bead perhaps on the correspondence that's coming in and out of the
yeah.
company? Could my grandfather just have dropped the information? Oh, I got to pay off a loan next week to so and so,
Right.
in passing somehow. One other situation that has been raised in our family is Cy Thompson did buy some animals from my grandfather. Could
Right.
he have bought some animals and then paid for those animals by way of paying off the loan?
Oh, yeah.
Again, who knows?
When you're used to moving things around all the
Yes,
time, that could be
yes.
how he said, "Oh, well, I'll get it to you
Oh,
this way."
yes,
That
right.
actually seems,
I mean, I think
from
it's,
the mind of an embezzler, that feels
yes,
like it could be true.
it's a plausible consideration.
Yeah.
And particularly if Cy Thompson, as I believe, was grooming everyone in the company and in the
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
that he was an upstanding, fine
Right.
specimen.
Yeah.
Might he have also thought such payment would curry him favor
Yeah.
from my grandfather? Now, both of these loans were paid off, as you mentioned, before the embezzlement was discovered. Not long before, but before.
Right.
And so it's very murky, to really
Right.
know exactly. And what a lawyer would say in a court of law, I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I guess where I come down on all of this is that I don't, like I said, I'm not an investigative journalist. I'm also not a lawyer. And my interest is really in trying to read between the tea leaves to some degree, given what I know about the family and given what I know about companies in general, as to what's most likely. Now, I
Right.
will say that to this day, including with my trip last week, I have found nothing, absolutely nothing, that suggests that my grandfather knew the embezzlement was going on. I have found nothing. And if I do in a month from now, if somebody sends me something, or
Yeah.
then I will have to reconsider. But for now, I do not believe he knew the embezzlement was going on any better than George Hormel, Jay Hormel,
Yeah.
the accounting companies, the
Yeah.
bankers, all of them.
Right.
However, I also can't help but think this was really a harmful piece of information to arise. Now, whether George Hormel knew about this, I don't know.
Right.
This was a bank that was tied into the Hormel company. And so when the embezzlement was discovered, a lot of the banks had to kind of open up their books and
Right.
for the regulators or the accountants and lawyers and stuff to figure out who owed what to whom and where the money should have gone. So I don't know whether the Hormel company or George Hormel personally knew about those two documents, but I certainly had never seen them before. I just happened to come across them in that
Yeah.
last box. So
Yeah.
it did sort of throw into a
Right.
lurch my conclusion. So
Yeah.
there's sort of a false ending in the book, and then this new information.
Exactly. Just as you're ready to like
Put
say,
it aside.
okay,
I'm
yeah, put
done.
it aside. I did my investigation.
Right.
I mean, that's the other overall assessment that I see looking at it all is that you really allowed yourself to be open to, as we talked about in the first episode, to
Yes.
really say, I'm ready to discover, I hope I'm ready to discover everything.
Right.
And you did, like, you did get that out of left field thing
Yeah.
at the end, and still, there's still not really anything conclusive,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
do you feel like, I mean, I'm assuming that it all feels very worthwhile, that you went through asking all these questions and you gave yourself the permission to keep asking them, and I feel that you're still asking them still, that someone could come forward with something that you haven't heard about yet, or
Right.
that we learn things from the past, and it
Yes.
may or may not make a difference. I don't know, like, does it
Yeah.
even matter? But
Right. Right. I mean, I do think that if I learned something else new, it would matter to me, and it would sit with me for quite a while before I could sort it all out in my mind and my heart. But I think that, well, one thing I just want to say is that what's one of the things that's interesting to me about memoir is that if you write a memoir, you write for a few years or a few decades, and you finally decide that you want to get it published, and you find a publisher and you get it
yeah,
published,
yeah,
there is an end to the story.
right.
But the lives of the people involved go on, as you're suggesting. And that is fascinating to me with memoir.
Yeah,
So, what happens to us as the authors after our books come out? What happens to the people who are talked about in the book, if they're still
yeah,
alive, is also fascinating to me
yeah,
because the work done to create a memoir is sufficient to change lives, I believe.
yes,
I saw my first book change lives, and this one may too. I don't necessarily know what that is right now.
yeah,
So I don't know that I'll ever know any more than I know now.
yeah,
Um, it absolutely has been worthwhile to me. I loved my grandparents as a child based on the stories I heard about them.
yeah,
I now love them as real human people.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I do love them. I so wish that I could have known them
I
both.
know,
I think
I
they
know.
were really exemplary people. And in Austin last week, I heard that from at least a
Oh,
dozen people
yeah,
whose parents knew my grandparents or whose
yeah,
grandparents were great friends of my grandparents, and heard the same, and also kind of said the same. There's no way your grandfather could have known this. It's just, it wouldn't have been in his
right,
character. And so those things are just, as a family member, really important to
right.
me. And I think my cousins all are thrilled, that they have learned as much as they have about our grandparents as well. So if that was all that had come out from it, then that would be enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I was very curious, like your family, what did they think? And so it's all been gratefully very inclusive and come around in a way that was satisfying, positive, not alienating.
Yeah,
So,
no, not
yeah.
alienating at all. I think, members of the family have slightly different takes on it. And
Right,
I mean,
right.
all have super appreciated the work involved and the effort to figure out what happened. It's also included in the aftermath is, some feeling of even more stridently, our grandfather was wronged. And
Yeah.
when you go to Austin, it's all about the Hormels, which
Yeah.
why wouldn't it be? It's the Hormel
Yeah.
company. On the other hand, I think there's some feeling in the family that our grandfather did an amazing amount of work to help the company actually grow to scale across the nation in 20 years, and that there's not much recognition for that.
Right, right.
Anyway, those are just new insights.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say, maybe this is what you just said, but was there anything else about your visit there most recently that was particularly enlightening or unexpected?
Not really unexpected. I don't think there was anything that was unexpected. What was illuminating to me was just how much I felt a heart connection to Austin, Minnesota, to the land there, once again,
Yeah.
to see the big, broad sweeps of acreage and the people there. The people have been nothing but warm and welcoming to me throughout. And it was really wonderful to see some people that I've known now for 25 years out there, as well as some
Yeah.
for fewer years. And also to the degree that it matters, which it does to an author, to have, like 110 people at the event, packed house with
That's
people standing
great.
around the edges. A lot of people very engaged in the story and a lot of really good questions afterwards and comments from people, as I was signing books, etc.
Yeah.
So I do feel as if there's a part of our legacy that has been revisited there.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that.
I know. I was going to say that's actually such a wonderful thing for you to return there representing your grandfather, your family who was there, and to get such recognition for that is immensely meaningful with
Yes, it
everything that
was.
went on.
It was.
Ah,
We had a lot of fun. And I will say this, we probably ate the best pork chop I've ever had in my entire life, which was a Hormel Duroc hog pork chop. And I'll tell you, if
uh,
anybody's out there who can find one, they are amazing.
it's funny you say that because a few of those moments when you were talking about, even in the book, some of the stuff that you had in the
Yes.
restaurants, one of my favorite things that I almost never have anymore is pork roast. And a good pork chop or pulled pork.
Yeah.
I am a huge, ooh, that sounds so good. I want to go there just for a sandwich.
I know. I want to figure out where I can find them back east. I don't know. I've never seen them in
I
the
know.
supermarkets. Not this kind of chop.
I was going to say, there's a lot of things, and thank God for this, that are of a place. And it's what
Yes.
makes a place
Yes.
special. And
Yes. Good
would
point.
we, we'll just have to eat whoopie pies until then.
Right, exactly. What Maine is good for, among many other things.
Yeah, among many, many, many. I have become especially partial to the whoopie pie, I will
Yeah.
say.
It's pretty easy
Yeah,
to
I
come.
know.
No, that's a very good point, about that being a really special thing to have when you are in the Midwest, and particularly in Austin, Minnesota.
Yeah, yeah. Before we wrap up, I thought that it would be great. We didn't really have you read anything from this. It was after discussion, but I was thinking in that spirit to have you read your dad's poem from the very end might be lovely if you would be willing to do
I
that.
would be honored to. That would be great. So just a couple of words to set this up. So this is in the autumn of 1921, after my grandmother's cancer has been diagnosed. So the family knows that she is probably dying. It's after the embezzlement was discovered, but before my grandfather was let go by the Hormel company. And one day in the nice autumn, my grandfather takes the family out on a car drive around Austin and then comes back to his house, his home, which includes a 10-acre apple orchard. And so this kind of takes place in the orchard. This poem was written by my father years after he was in Austin. And what's interesting to me is that if you read it in one perspective, you can imagine that my grandfather has not been fired, that this is all about his mother's dying. On the other hand, you can also read it with sort of a double intention here too, given some of the language that he uses. But I love this. I love this. It's one of my favorite of his poems. So it's called Orchard, and there are two parts. 1. Lovely were the fruit trees in the evening. We sat in the automobile, all 5 of us, full of the silence of deep grieving, for tragedy stalked among the fruit trees. Strongest was the father of solid years, who set his jaw against the coming winter, pure, hard, strong, and infinitely gentle, for the worst that evil brings can only kill us. Most glorious was the mother, beautiful, who in the middle course of life was stalked by the stark shape of malignant disease, and her face was wholly white like all desire. And we 3, in our benumbing youngness, half afraid to guess at the danger there, looked in stillness at the glowing fruit trees, while tumultuous passions raged in the air. 2. And the first, the father, with indomitable will, strove in iron decision, in all human strength, with a powerful, complete contempt of defeat, 6 feet of manhood and not a mark of fear. And the next, the mother, wonderfully mild, wise with the wisdom that never changes, poured forth her love divinely magnified, we knew not by what imminent despair. While the older brother and the younger, separate, yet placed in the first light of brutal recognition, held a trembling sister who knew not the trial of fortitude to come. And in the evening, among the warm fruit trees, all of life and all of death were there. Of pain unto death, of struggle to endure, and the strong right of human love was there.
That is really beautiful. And you know, what was interesting, I feel like when I read that the first time, I kind of glossed over it. But when I read it the second time,
Yes.
I was like, oh yeah. And even
Yes, like most good poems, you have to read them
yes,
several times.
absolutely. And in the very end, even as you say, it is true, I have found that our histories can inform us, even set us free, if only we are ready to let them.
Yes.
There's something incredibly wise there, and I don't know what other word to describe it, but about how we can only come to these things when we're ready to come to them.
Absolutely. Yes.
So,
yes. And probably my father could only come to write that
yeah,
poem when he too was ready to write
exactly.
it. And I'm so glad he did, because it gives me something to hold on to
Yeah.
when I think about my grandparents and his and my uncle and aunt's upbringing, life in Austin.
Such good stuff. Thank you, Gretchen. This has just
Thank
been
you,
so
Michelle.
much fun.
A total delight and a joy, and I really appreciate your great interest in this book. Thank you so much.
Another thing that has occurred to me as I continue to think about this book is that this book has been something that has continued to open up so many questions. I just love that. I love that Gretchen was open enough and brave enough to ask all the questions that she had about what happened to her grandfather. I'm also struck by the fact that as she indeed receives some of the answers and turns over many of these new details from that time, that opens up new questions. When we think a story has an ending, it really doesn't. It only changes and morphs and picks up with new characters. The end kind of never really happens. It's only where we decide to stop telling the story. I love how she now feels that there still could be new perspectives or details that will open up or be revealed. So we shall see. To follow up about that book that I mentioned I was reading, it is called Lady's Choice, Ethel Waxham's Journals and Letters, 1905 to 1910, A Wyoming Courtship. I also looked up that thing about the women's right to vote before national suffrage in 1920, and in fact, I did find this at crusadeforthevote.org, where Allison Lang writes, "At first, the American Woman Suffrage Association's strategy seemed promising as women started to win the right to vote state by state. The earliest suffrage victories were in the West. The territory of Wyoming granted women the vote in 1869, the same year as the founding of the two national suffrage organizations. When Wyoming became a state in 1890, the new government continued to allow women to vote. 3 years later, Colorado became the next woman suffrage state. Utah and Idaho followed in 1896. Wow, that is just fascinating. Whenever you think you know history about something, you go and look it up, and it's not always exactly what you think. It's just fascinating. Well, that is it for this bonus episode of Daring to Tell. I hope you enjoyed this follow-up conversation with Gretchen Charrington. I will certainly have a link in the show notes for her book. Coming up in September, I have something a little different and something super exciting, if I do say so myself. I will be talking with Charlotte Maya. Yes, she has been on before, author of Sushi Tuesdays, a memoir of love, loss, and family resilience. I am entirely proud to say that I have worked with Charlotte over the past few months to produce her narration of the audiobook of Sushi Tuesdays. What a ride. We are going to have a discussion about the process, the project, and her beautiful, beautiful, gripping book. I could not be more pleased about this. I cannot wait to share it with you. You have made it to the end of another episode, and this time I am going to leave you with a little different song from my musician-songwriter husband, Phil Rado. This one is a song that inspired him after reading a book from a different Mainer author, but one that I think works very well with the themes that we've discussed with Gretchen here today. It is called Milltown. As always, thank you for daring to listen.
Can we ever really move on? Be someone other than who we are? Someplace other than where my eyes see the trees have been cut down to size. Should we ever try to hold on to something everyone knows is gone? To someplace other than where my eyes see the trees have been cut down to size. Far away, and I'm a bit too smart to want to go back to the start. Can we ever really move on and be someone other than who we are? Be someplace other than where my eyes see the trees have been cut down to size. far away. And I'm a bit too smart to wanna go back to the start. Should we ever try to hold on to something everyone knows is gone? To some place other than where my eyes see the truth. I've been cut down to size. Can we ever really move on to someone other than who we are? Be someplace other than where my eyes see the trees. I've been cut down to size.